So we're going to talk about male aesthetics. If you look at the difference between masculine facial characteristics that are attractive, they are much different than the female facial characteristics. For example, the difference between male and a female face is, in general, the lines are sharper, there's more shadow effect, and there's also a difference in proportions. One of the examples is the frontal bossing. So if we can accentuate a little bit this supraorbital area over here, then we accentuate the male characteristics of his face. Also, the temporal area is important. So the goal is not to make it flat or slightly concave, but in a male, the temples can even be a little bit convex. Then looking at the zygoma, it's important that we don't make it round like in a female, but it can be still a little bit sharp in order to create a little bit of depth, a little bit of shadow here underneath the zygomatic arch. Very importantly, the mandible. The masseter, if we accentuate the masseter, we will increase the, let's say, powerful appearance. And so that will be accentuating strength and, of course, masculinity. And then lastly, the chin should not be, like in a female, as wide as the nose, but it should be as wide as the mouth. And therefore it becomes more masculine, and the male will look definitely more attractive. Now, it's also a beauty trait is to straighten the nose, but as our patient already has a good nose and no problems with his nose, we're going to leave that alone. Then, of course, we can also focus on more, let's say, general aesthetic indications like the tear trough, the palpebromalar groove, etc. But these are not necessarily the masculine traits that we could accentuate. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side of the face. And before I give him any injections, I'm just going to completely disinfect the entire face, because you never know where you're going to be touching the hairs or even the areas that we're not going to inject into. So the earlobes and the neck even, because we're going to go to the mandible at the end of this treatment. So definitely the cheek, the preauricular area, the mandible, and then even the neck and the earlobe. Everything needs to be disinfected. And the nose. So I'm going to mark the area where I want to give a little bit of extra projection. Over here. Over here. And so I can reach that area from the temporal crest, right here. And I can go underneath the galea in order to get to that area. Of course, over here, there is the supraorbital notch with the danger zones of the supraorbital arteries. And here is another danger zone, supratrochlear artery. And of course, there's also a very dense area of tissue over here that might make it a bit difficult to advance the cannula in this inferior part of the forehead. So at my entry point, I will give a little bit of anesthesia, 1, 2, 3. Over here. In the midline, I can find another entry point. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. So I will give him a nerve block, a supraorbital nerve block. So I palpate for the supraorbital notch over here. I can feel the depression in the rim, in the orbital rim, supraorbital rim. Then, just lateral to that, I introduce my needle, go straight down to the periosteum, and give a little blab here. Then a little more. It's just every time it's about 0.1 until I feel the pressure of that liquid pressing against my finger that is located on top of the supraorbital notch. I can do the same for the supratrochlear area. I can go in over here, 1, 2, 3, straight down to the periosteum, on the periosteum, giving him a small blab, small blab, small blab. At my entry point, I introduce my cannula, lift up the tissue in front of my cannula, so I'm not squeezing the cannula itself. I rotate to make a weak spot in the galea, and then I press through, click. I feel a kind of a click, and sometimes you can hear it too. And then very gently I advance over the periosteum until I get to the high density area here, where there is the nerve coming out of the supraorbital notch, or the supraorbital foramen. I give a retrograde, and every time I give a retrograde, it is no more than 0.05 in this area, just to be safe. And it's always retrograde. It's never static. It's always taking into consideration the possibility that even though we are working with a cannula and not with a needle, it is still possible that the cannula could enter into a blood vessel. And therefore, I also would like to keep my finger pressing against that area. Are you okay?
Yeah.
That's about half of the half, so quarter syringe. But from the medial side, I can do the same if it's necessary. So again, I lift the tissue. And with very small amounts, and from here I want to use even less because I'm closer to the supratrochlears, even less product, 0.025 per retrograde. Because studies have shown that possible retinal embolization in the cadaver studies that they've done, the minimum amount was 0.04 from the supratrochlear artery. So to keep it safe, I would recommend 0.025 as a maximum amount for a retrograde, even though we are using a cannula and we're perpendicular to the direction of the artery, so we take every precautionary measure.